I guess I first off will start by saying congratulations on your Emmy nomination. This is a excellent episode. I was just rewatching clips from it this morning to prep for this, and I'm assuming anyone who's going to be listening to this has already seen the episodes. So the moment where Matt Smith just like cuts I'm forgetting his name. Raymond's head in half, and his tongue is sticking out at the top of his head, and it's like, well, he can keep his tongue, is just so shocking and so well done. So that's a fantastic bit of television in general. So tell me about this episode in general. I think I want to start with the fact that you have talked about that it was very difficult shooting a couple sequences where basically everyone who's anybody in the cast is in a sequence together. And we got the big dinner scene, the most awkward dinner scene of all time, and balancing all these very dynamic characters in terms of coverage and deciding what to emphasize can't be easy. So tell me a little bit, I guess we'll start with the dinner scene. Tell me about blocking that and putting that together in general.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so the dinner scene, fun fact, was actually the very last scene that we shot in the entire schedule of the entire season.
Oh, wow.
Which is not usually how you end a season's worth of shooting on like such a massive scene with all the major players. Usually you wrap it up on like some little inserts, but this was like literally like, because of a number of factors, like, there we were shooting this scene as on our final day of shooting, but that for us was great in a way, because it meant that we had a lot of time to think about the scene and plan how we wanted to do it, and really work with the other departments in trying to figure out just simple things like how to stage it in the space where we had. So for example, like it's meant to happen in a sort of intimate dining hall in the Red Keep. But, we wanted, the producers wanted us to reuse, a room that was already built. So we worked with the production designer, Jim Clay, and the set decorator, Claire Richards, to essentially reconfigure the small council chamber. So that, which is a room that we're in a lot throughout the season, but they changed all the windows and we oriented the table differently. And that orientation of the table, came to us not just because we thought, okay, well, that will make the room feel different, but also, because we always refer to the scene as the Last Supper, and that's obviously like a very famous, iconic, painting and image with, Jesus at the head and, and all of his disciples on either side. And so that's how we decided to stage the scene, with sort of Viserys being the focal point, and the greens are on one side and the blacks are on the other. And, and you have the one generation, the older generation on one side and the younger generation on the other. And those simple, ultimately simple blocking choices were really helpful then in then determining, how we covered the scene, and showed, some of those dynamics, between the two sides, between the generations, that sort of thing. That's what's happening in that scene.
Yeah. So I was also curious, I guess, generally, I guess we have that scene, and then we have the even more interestingly shot sequence that I kind of prompt at the beginning when everyone is in the main throne hall. And it's, I guess some of how in both of these scenes, who we're going to focus on, that comes out in the edit, I'm sure you covered everything. But I was curious just in general with both of these sequences, in terms of was there any kind of POV camera work? Is there anything you did in camera to kind of bring out the emotions that the characters are probably feeling in both of these scenes?
Yeah. So, I'm really glad you asked that, because I think that was our primary goal really, throughout this entire episode. And in these two scenes, which, like you say, they're massive and all the characters are there. So it becomes even a greater challenge to sort of like strip it down to like, the essential moments of like what's going on for this character in this moment versus this moment, and who should we prioritize, and where do we want to put the camera, really, whose story are we telling? And so that's why the director Geeta Patel and I, we really chose to focus throughout the entire episode, and these scenes were no exception, on what we called the hero triangle, which is Viserys sort of at the head of the whole thing, and then Rhaenyra on the one hand and Alicent really on the other. So, in the throne room, for example, like there's a really big moment when Viserys shows up, and nobody's expecting, him to come, and that's a lot of the tension, is will he or won't he? And when he does, we really, the fact that he does show up is important to every single character in that room, like it changes something for every single person there. So of course, it's important to see everybody's reaction, but the main person who we wanted the camera to be with is really him, because that to us seemed like, the most emotional place to put the camera is walking into that room with him for the first time, making that journey, that long journey across that massive room, which, when Patty did it for the first time, because we didn't know how, we had thought about it for so long, like what it was going to be like, but we didn't know exactly how he was going to perform it. And just watching him do it for the first time, we were just like, oh my God, because we had a body double there that day who was supposed to do some of that stuff for the wides and stuff like that. But just, how much sort of detail he put into the posture and the movement, like nobody could do it like him. And so anyway, so we definitely, thought it's most important for the camera to be with him for this. But we also, I was definitely cognizant of like not wanting to, physically exhaust him, to be perfectly honest. So, so the camera has to track across the floor with him, but because we wanted to do it in as few takes as possible, I had the key grip sort of, because we did use a lot of Steadicam throughout the season, which is a departure from, I think, what they did in Thrones. And we did that because we really like moving with characters and seeing the world from characters' perspectives. But in the case of Patty's walk across the room, I had the key grip rig 2 cameras on a rickshaw on stabilized heads, just so we could get, a wider shot and a tighter shot and at once, and not have him have to do it, so many times, because it was, anyway, this is exhausting.
Yeah. I bet. Okay. So another thing that stands out, I mean, the season as a whole, but certainly in this episode, there's a lot of scenes shot in pretty extensive darkness. And I know that something that the DPs on Game of Thrones struggled with, especially when shooting for footage that was going to be compressed ultimately, was sometimes they'd get complaints about it being too dark. You guys didn't really run into that. Clearly, you seem to have mastered the problem. So I was curious, some of these scenes, like in Viserys's bedchamber, it's at night, there might be a storm in the background, but you don't even have candles there. So tell me a little bit about what you do in terms of lighting sources to show the gloom. It's very dark, but also making sure the audience sees everything.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. It is a good question. It is something that we continue to sort of, struggle is not exactly the right word, but it's a constant challenge on the show, because I think the show should be dark. The subject matter is dark. The characters, have dark things happening to them all the time. It's drama. And so the way you show that a lot is through shadow and contrast, and leaving things to the viewer's imagination. And it is challenging to do that in the era of television and streaming, when you don't know, how an audience is watching something. They could be watching it on their phone in broad daylight and then be, sending nasty tweets about how they can't see anything. So it is difficult. But I think, the scene you are remarking on, when Rhaenyra comes to Viserys's bedchamber in the middle of the night, to beg him to be there for her, I think I mean, so first of all, the way I approach, how to light a scene is always just, what's the reality of the situation? What would be the real world motivators for the light? And I think in that instance, I asked Gita, like, do you think she would have come to his bedside, with a candle? Like, would she have walked through the halls, lighting her way? And Gita said, like, honestly, I don't think so. Like, she's creeping in there. Like, this scene should happen in the dark, and so then how do you see characters when there is no light source, when it's dark? Well, the only other source is moonlight. And like you say, there's a storm out there. So in addition to moonlight, there's lightning. And so, yeah, so then that's the source. That's where everything has to be motivated from. It has to come from, it has to come from the window. And happily, in that room, there was a window. So, I used it. Yeah.
Okay, so one scene where you got a lot of candles, the embalming room or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Very striking scene. You have all of the candles arrayed behind you. Tell me a little bit about lighting that scene.
Yeah, so that's we called that scene the Silent Sisters scene. It's a scene where they're sort of preparing Vaemon's body. So it happens directly after the throne room scene. So you've had this sort of explosive, dramatic scene, all the characters, blah, blah, blah. And then you cut to this really sort of small, quiet moment, which is just a moment for Rhaenys, really, in our episode, because she winds up not going to the family dinner. So it's just a last moment with her sort of establishing, her familial connection, to Vaemond and her sort of place in the whole sort of drama of the show, really. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a really small scene, but I absolutely loved shooting it. To be honest with you, we were originally meant to shoot it on location in Spain, and we had a gorgeous sort of old church that we were going to do it in. And because of COVID, various things about our Spain schedule had to change, and we lost the opportunity to do it in that location, which we were sad about. But then we worked again with the production designer Jim and set decorator Claire to again transform, you'll never guess, the small council chamber.
Again? Okay, how many locations was the small council chamber in? No, don't tell me, it'll spoil the illusion, but now I'm gonna keep an eye out. Like, is this the small council chamber?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. In our episode, it was just a running gag, like, what else can we put in this room? So once again, we were like, let's orient everybody in a different direction, like, and make it, so basically, and so the candles became, like, obviously the chief lighting motivator, but also the sort of, I think it really helps to set the tone and the mood for the scene, which is a sort of, like, religious sort of rite of passage moment as well. So yeah, in the end, I was really happy with how that scene turned out. Despite the fact that we did it on on a set that we shot a lot of other stuff on. Yeah, it was all good.
There's a couple just kind of quick shots I noticed. One is, and this is also probably the production designer, I'm sure, but there's a shot in the Godswood where you have these wonderful reds on the tree. And it's really quite a bit of contrast from an episode that in a lot of ways is pretty desaturated, but you have this just of color. And I know that's not just this episode, but I was kind of curious about that.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very that's a holdover, obviously, from Game of Thrones, that the Godswood tree has that color to it. I mean, to be honest with you, that tree is greatly sort of exaggerated and expanded by VFX. So the production design department only builds like a small part of it. And yeah, but that's a scene where, I forget how many pages that scene is, but let's say it's like 3.5 or something pages of dialogue, and the script says dusk. And so that's always a fun photography challenge, which is how to shoot a scene all day outside, and make it look like dusk. So so we worked very hard to block out all the light essentially, and to make it feel, because we wanted that scene, you know, that's the scene that happens right before Rhaenyra winds up going to see her father, like and so you know, the fact that you know, there was some version of it in Geeta's head, not on the script, but in Geeta's head, where like we actually wanted the storm, you to feel like the storm is coming in that scene, so that in the next scene when she comes to Viserys and it's raining and lightning, like, you know, there's been a sort of, I mean, there's obviously some time passage, but that helps to transition. So, you know, so we had the special effects like blowing the wind and the leaves around, and, you know, and I blocked out all the light to try to make it feel very much, you know, like end of day, which relates to her, you know, emotional state. Like this is my last opportunity to, you know, she's pleading with Rhaenys in that scene to help her, and the next scene she's pleading with Viserys, and this is all just like whatever she can do, because on the you know, the next day she's going to have her, you know, succession not just like formally tried, basically, like, you know.
And then another thing you do is, obviously you're a big fan of shooting through things in the foreground.
Yes.
So I loved, you have one shot, I think, where the camera's behind one of the stars of the Seven, and we shoot through there. And there's a scene in the small council room, I think, where you're shooting through kind of like a window frame where the panes are blocked out. That's obviously a little you trademark, but I just wanted to see if there's anything you wanted to say about that.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, like in the case of shooting, when we shot through the Star of the Seven, you know, that's part of the sequence of Rhaenyra coming back to the Red Keep for the first time. You know, she's been away for 6 years, and this is her coming back to this place that used to be her home, and she doesn't recognize it. You know, she says that in that scene, I don't recognize it. And so, you know, to be able to show that is sort of difficult. Like, I mean, it was just something we thought about for a while, and with, you know, again, with the production designer Jim Clay, you know, asking the question like, well, what is different about this place, and how can we show that? And that Star of the Seven, you know, for us became like the obvious sort of symbol of like, you know, there's a new, you know, Allison's in charge now. And so, you know, so we shot through it, not just because, you know, it's cool, but really because you know, because it's like it, you know, it's big in the foreground and she's small, and she's feeling this sort of like overwhelmingness of Allison having all the power in the situation, and, you know, and she's coming back to this place, you know, like feeling much sort of on the back foot, you know what I mean? So it's emblematic of this sort of power relationship. And then we cut from there to you know, this was a transition that, you know, that we designed, and happily the editor and Geeta, you know, put it in their cut, and it stayed continuous, so that, you know, you see the Star of the Seven, you see Rhaenyra looking at it, and then you cut and you're in a new, you know, you see the Star of the Seven again, but now you're in the small council chamber, and that transitions you into seeing Allison at the head of the small council chamber table for the first time, you know, again, like just connecting the dots of like who's in charge now, and who's, you know, who's running the Red Keep now.
Oh, I love how much thought your team has put into this, and little details like that. Last thing I like to ask with anyone who worked on the show, what other than the Last Supper, what paintings did you look at? Because I remember in Game of Thrones, someone had, I think, cited Caravaggio's Calling of St. Matthew, which is one of my favorite paintings ever. I was curious if you have any that you're directly kind of referencing or riffing off of in here.
I mean, yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, the Last Supper is the most obvious one that comes to mind. You know, I mean, I think most people on the show, you know, do reference Caravaggio and Vermeer and some of the like, you know, like natural light masters, basically, because that's, like I said, like those are the sources we're working with. We're working with daylight, moonlight, candlelight, and that's it. And those are two painters who, you know, who are motivating, you know, similarly. So yeah, but Anyway, that's what I got.
Okay, so I can't wait to see your work on season 2. Without spoiling anything, are you getting to play around with something that's even bigger in scale? You know, this is a very kind of intimate episode. So season 2, are you getting to do anything?
Well, I'll just say this, you know, Geeta and I were both aware that, you know, we were shooting season 1 House of the Dragon and our episode had 0 dragons. So I think both of us were really making it a goal for ourselves to not only come back, but to get some dragons next time around.
Okay, I can't wait.
I'll leave it hanging there. But yeah, so anyway, it's great to be back and working with Geeta again. And yeah, I'm excited for everybody to see what we're doing.
Oh, I can't wait to see it. So thank you so much, and good luck this Emmy season.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me, Will.
Of course.